DataFest Africa. I wanted to say data, they say fest, I say Africa.
DataFest Africa.
Amazing. Alright, so we're going to move straight on to the next item on our agenda, right, where we're having a keynote speech. And our speaker is right here. Look, we're going to give our speaker a Yoruba name. Because when I saw the name, I called it in the Yoruba way. So I think it's good that we're going to give our speaker a Yoruba name. So, Jane Abbott is on the building, but we're going to call her Jadisola. How do you name? So Jane, you have a new name, Jadisola. A round of applause as Jadisola comes on stage. Please make sure to keep clapping. Welcome on stage.
Thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. How far, Una? Yeah, it really has been number one on my list to be able to come and hang out and meet the communities that we've been so close to over the years. And when I was invited to talk here, I was given a topic. And so, yes, as per introduction, I've been in the AI space for a little while, back when nothing worked, particularly in the language space. Right now I identify as, I'd say, Chief GPU Cost Tamer, as opposed to Chief Technology Officer, which is my actual role. When you're working in AI and you're running an AI company, you spend a lot of money on your GPU costs. And so, the truth about language AI, and we've seen it, and we've seen a lot in Nigeria, across the continent, whether it be Masakane, whether it be startups are working towards this. But the truth of the matter is that today's language AI is missing out on 2.1 billion people. 2.1 billion people now, right now. So that's the entire emerging markets. This is the global south. And this doesn't just mean that people can't use ChatGPT in their own language when they can use it in English. It means they don't have access to digital services as we see the whole world pivot towards the use of AI. I'm going to do this dance a lot. And so we know that 90% of AI is actually built for English and a couple of other Western languages. That one's a sad and heavy truth to learn. Similarly, only 3% of the people in emerging markets, in the global south, in Africa, can actually use this technology, actually speak those languages that they support. And we know we say it's bad, it's like, oh, it only supports English, but it's very bad. All of us in this room, we can speak English from here. But as soon as we actually go out into the world and we're really looking at language inclusivity and impact, it's imperative that we support all of our languages. And of course, the last challenge is our languages are low resourced. They're not just low resourced in terms of we have less data to train the models. They're low resourced in the fact that we have less access to compute, which is prohibitively expensive. They're low resourced in the fact that we do not have decades of research behind them because there was not enough funding going into our spaces. They're low resourced in the fact that the societal support, the societal colonialism efforts basically destroyed our languages. And yet, we still speak them. And so that is how we get to our 2.1 billion people. This is people who are currently not able to participate in technology. And so what does the opportunity unveil itself as? For Lalafa, what this means is looking at building scalable language AI for emerging markets to enable communication between people in different languages. And so this is a cute picture where we've got people calling each other, calling in different parts of the world, speaking their language and still able to understand each other. I think a lot of the things that we currently position AI as is often it's this tool, this companion, but there's this fear that perhaps we become too reliant on them. But let's imagine a world where the focus is less around how we're augmenting ourselves and rather than how we're augmenting ourselves to work together. And so that's really the vision of the work that we've been doing for so long, is how are we enabling us as a continent, as a world actually, to be able to speak to each other better. There are lots of animations on here that I was not ready for. Great. So the challenge, first challenge is talent. And by talent, I don't mean that, we aren't here, because we clearly are. By talent, we mean that in the amount of how young our community is, how young the field is, not even the West has figured out. Not even we talked about OpenAI earlier, not being open, but OpenAI having the best people, they still can't get their costs down to be profitable, right? So right now, the skills, the talent, this is still pretty much unknown. Next one, we can talk about it all day, is the data. Less than 1% of the data on the internet is in languages. And we know that's been the primary source. Particularly if we're talking about the accessible internet, there are lots more data behind closed walls within companies of varying degrees of quality. But in the open source realm, or the open data realm, less than 1%. And this is what I'm going to touch on. I had an interesting conversation with Ayo yesterday. And we'll go into a little bit more details later. But our existing models are performing poorly in Africa. And it's not just a data problem. It's an architectural problem. And then lastly, the stat just came out a couple of weeks ago, MIT Technology. Every couple of years we'll see a stat like this. 98% of AI, particularly Gen AI, that was the statistics, does not make it to production. This is a global stat. No matter how much money we are putting in, 98% is not getting through. And this has actually gotten worse. It used to be that 89% of all machine learning technology and machine learning tools was not making it into production. That was about 2-3 years before the Gen AI had. And now it's actually gotten even worse. And so this really points to a whole bunch of these very clear challenges, not only for us, but often the world. And so how is the world going to handle this? How do we support more languages, more domains, the places, the things, the people, the things we know about, which we know these models aren't doing very well at the moment? The first one is always just add more data. The data doesn't exist, right? So we hear this from the West, we'll just keep adding data. There's a very interesting study which Masakane did a couple of years ago. We called it the data audit. They went and looked at all the open source data that claimed it was multilingual, claimed it could support hundreds of languages, and it's, it basically this big number on the number of multilingual languages, or the number of languages they had in there. We went and looked at that data for all those languages. And so after looking, we discovered that a very high percentage in some of those data sets, so some of them around 80% of the data, was not even in the same language. So it's been classified as a language, but it was not that language. A lot of it was not any language. It was just garbage. A lot of it was offensive. A lot of it was just terrible quality. And so this idea of you can just take data from somewhere and suddenly it'll get better isn't going to happen. And so our answer is to create the right data. And there's a very important word there, which is create. Data has been seen as an extractive process. We see what's out there, we take it from the people who made it. We tend not to compensate them very well or at all. We see this a lot in the art realm. We build something and we earn money off people's data. However, if we pivot that around and say we know the people we're building for, we know the use cases, let's create the right data. Let's find sustainable process for data creation such that data creators are empowered and that data is aligned to the tooling that we need to build for those people. And so that's been a really large focus of what we've been doing at the lab as well as this coming. Next one, how Africa needs to be different, is this great story of like, oh, just fine tune what's out there. Just fine tune the existing model. It doesn't work. We've seen it kind of work. So many of us have tried to do this. We've got people in the room who've tried to do it, who've just done the fine tuning. It gets you somewhere, but what we've noticed is that it's not at a quality to where it is widely usable. And so that isn't working very well either. And we can try, we can get more data, and we can try some techniques there, but this just fine tune it to adapt it to a new language or domain is not actually simple at all. Create the right building blocks, create the right methodology. We've got a pollution, I'd say calling it a pollution because it's infeasible to comprehend how many papers are coming out. And it's very unclear which ones really work for people, which ones really work when put in a production setting. And so we really have to hone in on this question of what are the right building blocks? Are the architectures we're using correct? Are the tokenizers we're using correct? Just make the model bigger is one we like to see. We also here. This is a classic one we've seen for the past couple of years, and that seems to be slowing down. For us, it's a really big concern. Where are we going to train this big model? Where? With what money? I don't know. A number of you have probably tried to train a set of, whether it be the original GPTs, the Queen, etc. It is very, very expensive. And it takes a lot of time. And when you're done, you're still not sure if it's going to work. And so making it bigger and bigger is this bloating effect that isn't actually very useful. Well, I've got all my slides and stuff. And so here we talk about this, the building blocks, but kind of the efficiency aspect. But instead of scaling vertically, we're going to scale horizontally. How can we ensure the building blocks are the right ones? Kind of looking like this, is we've got this idea, vertical scaling. You've been in the DevOps space, in the infrastructure space. Vertical scaling is when you take a computer and you need it to use more connections or work on a bigger scale, you just make the computer bigger. You pay a very large cost to make that computer bigger, and it ultimately has limits and scales. I see that's what's happening with models. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger with extremely diminishing returns. And so you bloat these models. They become unwieldy, they become hard to manage, they become hard to train, we still don't know what's going on inside them. And that we're going to get stuck on. And so perhaps we pivot to a different plane. If you want to scale across languages and domains, let's think horizontally. The same way we would scale out our Kubernetes cluster as we keep adding more pods, more nodes. Let's focus on smaller, nimble models. Perhaps they can work together and learn something. But this idea of creating smaller models that are focused for your domain and language, focused for the use case, focused for the research, means that our compute costs decrease. It means that our overall infrastructure needs decrease. It means that the data that we have from that model is the right size and isn't going to be overwhelmed by the amount of English data you might have already trained from that model. So what this has meant for the LAPA in the past couple of years is we tried making a little language model. It's not an end product, it's an intermediate product, so it's a baseline. It's the baseline. It took too much money and compute to make for us not to open source it. And the idea is that you can take that and fine tune on top of it. And we've had pretty good feedback that if you do actually do the fine tuning on top of it for a particular task, say machine translation, you can get pretty decent results. We then took that even further, and what was quite impressive about Nkuba was how small it was. It was a little language model. It was the size of a Gemma's, actually even smaller than that. We trained it on a couple of gigabytes of data because that was all that was available. And in doing that, we were still able to beat some of these really large models on a number of tasks, which was quite incredible. We then took that further and worked with Cindy, I'd say cattle of Africa, I'm sure you're all aware. And with that, Zindi participants went and made the model even smaller and made it work even better, showing that this direction of let's go in small, let's go in with the right building blocks has value, and we should continue down that. And lastly is this more reflective component, is we've got a huge issue measuring quality in language right now. How do we know when something is good enough? You know, we've moved away from numbers, we've moved away from accuracies. We see these big benchmarks. What we often find is those benchmarks aren't actually correlating to real world performances. And so we've been doing a little bit of work on the side with OpenAI to kind of define what an evaluation framework might actually look like. Okay, this last a little bit small, but here I'm going back to data. We can't just create data from grants because that money will run out. That also means all our data will be open data. And while this is valuable, there also are some downsides. Once again, it is extracted. People from the West are paid to come take our data. Maybe they pay a small fee. Ultimately, if we release it open source, it becomes available to use and is being used by those players. And they're quite consistent with what they want to do with that data. They are like, it needs to be CC 4.0, completely open source, no rights attached. And that's the funders coming in and saying that that's what they need. And your funders behind the room are your big tech companies. And so we're in that situation of data extraction again. Having a product, whether it be our raw minerals, whether it be our data, taking off of our continent, repackaged and repurposed and sold back to us. And so what we really want to do is how can we build a data economy where we, as practitioners and working with the community, are creating a cycle that allows us to fund ourselves. And so what we did is we modeled some of the business around it. We released a small data set for isiXhosa, which is one of our local South African languages, under a new license, which made it open for commercial use for organizations that could prove they were African and needed to be paid by for anyone who is outside the continent. And this is the kind of things that we need in order to set ourselves up for success, to eventually have sovereignty over what we build. If data is the oil that powers everything, then we need to treat it very carefully and not let the rest of the world dictate what the right way to do that is. One of the big things that's come across, and so everyone, I worked, co-founded Masakane, did a lot of research in that space, and now with the Lapo, we're really saying what is the gap between the research and the practice? And the truth is it's always been quite a long gap. Productionizing machine learning has been my day job for a very long time. And when I was working back in the day in this space, it was in English. It is even bigger in our languages. And so we've got this idea of evaluation ops. It's really thinking quite carefully around what we're evaluating. The idea is that you've got different sources. Got to stay on that one. We've got different aspects that we're addressing here. And so part of it is making sure that the data that we're collecting is continuously fresh, getting that annotated in a way that is live. We're making sure we're getting it from the users, not just from people within the organization, for example. And we're making sure that we have business experts looking at what's happening and understanding how it impacts their downstream tasks. The next component is the analyst approach. It's when we do have that data, we look at it, and we go, what is wrong? And we get a multidisciplinary group to actually look at it, whether it be linguists, whether it be our scientists, or whether it's a number of automated techniques that we do. Lastly, second lastly is experimentation. And so here we're like, cool, when we've identified a set of problems, what do we then go do? We then go either create data, we then have identified maybe a architectural problem with the model, and so we go work on that, and then we retrain. And lastly is this productionization step. Very, very, very under looked at. Because when you're working in the space, things that matter a lot are latency. Things that matter a lot are making your costs make sense to organizations. And so this continuous deployment, but also continuous optimization of your infrastructure is super important. And there's loads of opportunities for this, because no one's really, well, some startups are trying to get to it, but because the whole world who has, or the West that has loads of compute, they're just like, well, just keep funding this, one day we'll get to optimization. What it means is Africa is we're very well positioned to do that. Africa's models are more accurate. And so Lalapo has built a number of transcription and translation models. That's actually our main business. And in just a year of really honing in on this, we've been able to beat all the big clouds. So transcription, you want the numbers to go down, that's word error rate. And we are currently beating Google, Azure, Microsoft. And this is for our particular domain, which is customer service. Translation, similarly, translation is a bit harder, because Google and a couple of others have been playing in this game for a while. But you can see already we're beating them on our particular customer domain. Ooh, this slide is hard to see, even for me. I'll give you a summary. We've got a ground truth. This is a call center call. It's been anonymized. It says, hello, you're through to organization's customer service. You're speaking to Nelly, how may I help you? Good, thanks, etc., etc. Amazon doesn't support, so this is what it's done, was written in Zulu, got transcribed, and translated into English. So there's Zulu spoken, then transcribed into written Zulu, then translated. It's a voice-to-text process. And so this is the English version after going through that whole pipeline. And so we have this, it's still active, you have a contract, etc., etc. And so we really can build models that can compete with the biggest and the best. And even more so, we can build it cheaper because we use less data, because we use less compute. And so the opportunity is not how do we do things like the rest of the world. The opportunity is how do we embrace what we are good at. And as a society, we are resourceful. We use the most from the little we have, and that is one way we can build our models. Let's make ourselves efficient rather than bloating. And so my message to everyone, and so, why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And so the world's view of AI, when I look at the imagery being generated by most of the generative AIs, we also look at a lot of the films that are being built. It's got this cyberpunk aesthetic, a dystopian aesthetic, a place where people are disconnected from each other, a place where people do not have access to quality. It's access to speed. It's access to almost inequality in a way. But you've got these very, very, very unpleasant futures that we're imagining. And one of the thought exercises me and my co-founder, Pelenomi Monoya, CEO, did many years ago when we started Lalapo, was coin the term Ubuntu punk as opposed to cyberpunk. Instead of high-tech low-life, which is a narrative that's communicated by cyberpunk, we go for high-tech high-life. It's a world in which the technology we're building not only is sustainable, unlike many of the approaches in the West, it also is connecting.
It helps us connect with each other more than it helps us connect with tech. And this world, we can see, is something that's very human-driven. And so instead of jumping on walls because the world is going one way, we should be building for what happens when that collapses. Because right now it doesn't make sense. And so we need to build the phoenix that rises when things fall. And we're in the right place to do that. So thank you.